Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the first day of summer 2039, and our Buffalo Wings are having a good, solid season. 40 and 29 record, 2 games up on the Phillies in the National League East as we try to win a division title for an eighth consecutive season. The pitching, as usual, has been excellent this year, and the hitting has been better than it has been in recent years. We already have 4 players who are in double-digit home runs here in early June. Hitting home runs has been an issue for us the last couple of seasons since we moved on from Shamar Jenneret. And the homegrown talents Joe Gallagher and Joe Edwards, along with Juan Romero, who we traded for this past off season, all are on pace to hit over 30 homers this year. And if we continue to get that type of production out of our offense and our pitching staff stays relatively healthy, I think we can do some damage, not just in the regular season, but hopefully in the postseason this year. Just one significant injury thus far, and it's not a crippling injury, but our new stopper, Nate Ruckel, still out another 1 to 2 weeks. Not a major issue, hopefully. Has some elbow inflammation. Hoping that by shutting him down, he will get over that. While he's been out, we've been able to bring up Ben Borgen, pitcher who was up with us briefly last year. And you can see Borgen hasn't even pitched yet for us. It's just been a couple of days, I think, since Ruckel went on to the injured list. Yeah, 2 days ago, it was the 19th that he hurt himself. So he's on the IL now. Hopefully we'll get to see a little bit of Borgen over the next couple of weeks before we have to make a decision on whether or not to send him back down. But overall, it's been a nice start to this 2039 season for the Buffalo Wings. We're definitely not in the mix right now for the best record in baseball. Baltimore at 47 and 24 is 6 games ahead of us for the best record in baseball. And Nashville, Seattle, and Colorado all have better records than us at this point as well. So we've got some ground that we are going to need to make up if we're going to ultimately have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. But we've got still over 90 games to hopefully successfully pass those teams. And as I mentioned, the main goal is to win the NL East and ensure we get a first round bye. The Phillies have won 9 in a row at this point to close the gap on us to 2. We played really good in April. We played incredibly in May. June thus far has been a disappointing month for us. Hopefully we'll play better over the last 9 or 10 games in the month of June. But right now, we turn our attention to the first-year player draft. And as we noted at the end of our last episode, we are picking 35th in this draft, and we had simmed ahead at the end of our last episode to that 35th pick, and we kind of showed off some of the players that we were most interested in thinking about pursuing. And I'd just like to start off, first of all, by thanking everyone who shared their opinions on who we should select. We'll get into kind of the voting, as it were, from the loyal viewers and those of you who were gracious enough to share your opinions with me shortly. First, we're going to take a look at a couple guys that we aren't going to go with. Our scouting director recommends we go with the center fielder Dane Kame. Talked about him in the past episode. His bat could certainly be decent, but not exceptional. Not a ton of speed, kind of a corner outfielder. just not all that exciting a prospect. Typically, he is the type of guy that we might be looking to picking in the mid to late 30s, or the early to mid 30s, which is typically where we've been picking for most of the past several years after having had a lot of good regular seasons. But this year, there's a lot of pitchers around who we are interested in. And when we ask our scouting director who he recommends as far as the pitchers, it's another guy that we are not going to pick, but we did touch on him last episode. Our scout recommends we go with Rafiq Goofy Nazarova. Given that there's a couple other pitchers I like, I am not going to follow my scout's instruction. He is a guy who has 3 pitches that are close to major league quality, potential to have absolutely devastating stuff if he's able to add that exceptional changeup that we think he could have. So his stuff could be off the charts. Control could be a bit above average. But he's a fly ball pitcher who at best we think is going to have average movement. So that's a negative. Not great at holding runners on base, but not so bad that it would disqualify him. Do like his durability, but I don't like the low leadership, work ethic, and intelligence, which are the 3 personality traits that I care about the most, and he's negative in all of those, in addition to being negative in adaptability. So Nazarova is not a guy that we are going to go with, despite the fact that if our scout was the general manager, that's the pitcher that he would select. So that leaves us with the decision among the 2 players that we were most interested in at the end of the previous episode. And the player who I thought would likely get the most support from viewers is the player that most of you like. And he's the youngest guy that we are considering, and it's Gregorio Garola. And as I said, he was the overwhelming favorite of those of you who have taken the time to opine. Jarek Braxton, Wyme943, Stanley Rosella, Patrick DeBonis, Sakruth, Jackhammer Possessa, Ben Mierig, and DLL1B14 all kind of said that if it was their decision, they would go with Gregorio Garola. And although his pitching ratings look interesting, and they certainly are, he's a guy who we think could have 4 to 6 pitches at the major league level. Realistically, probably a 5-pitch guy. Think his stuff is above average, with above average movement and control. He's got the high work ethic that we like to see. Good stamina. He's not particularly good at holding on runners, but that's not a disqualifier. It's a nice to have. I think looking at this profile, best case scenario, he's probably a good 3 starter. If we build a good rotation like we've built over the last several years, he's probably more of a 4 for a team like ours. But a pretty valuable pitcher. And the other thing that Garola has going for him that many of you noted is that he's also a 2-way player who we think could be a little bit above average in just about everything, have a pretty good eye, and be kind of average in terms of his avoiding strikeouts. But this is a profile of a guy who could hit 260, 270, probably 20, 25 home runs. So a pretty interesting bat. He's got the capability to play just about anywhere defensively. Wouldn't really like him anywhere except first base, corner, outfield, but he could potentially play a number of positions, even though right now, not surprisingly, for a high school star, he's a pitcher/shortstop. So there's a lot to like about him, and I think, to kind of summarize the point that many of you made, 2-way player who could be a good major league starter and a good major league hitter is an incredibly valuable player to have on a roster. And it's certainly a very compelling argument that I've been thinking about myself over the last 36 hours or so. And the other pitcher that I mentioned at the end of the last episode that I was strongly considering is Jeff Frikowiak. And he also had some support, not my four-ply, and David Chesley opined that Frikowiak would be the player that they would go with. Taking a look at his profile, certainly if he fully develops, he's got above average stuff, just like the two-way player, Garola, and his movement and control are also potentially well above average if he completely develops. Likely a three-pitch guy with a fastball, a splitter, and a curve. If that changeup develops, that could certainly help his stuff get to be at a real high level. Has better stamina and a bit better at holding runners than Garola. Like the high intelligence, don't love the low leadership and the low loyalty, but wouldn't use them to completely disqualify him. I do like the fact that Frikowiak has faced off as a good competition level in the OC, I'm guessing, Orange, California. And even facing that good competition level, he's had an ERA well below 1, with almost 2 strikeouts per inning over the course of his high school career. So I think he's proven it on the field. But unlike Garola, Frikowiak is a one-way guy only. Going to do nothing with his bat. And he doesn't have the high work ethic that Garola has that don't want to say maximizes his chance of fully developing, but certainly contributes strongly to the ability of a player to ultimately maximize their God-given potential. So when we get to the point where we compare Frikowiak and Garola, as I said, we think their stuff potential is even. Frikowiak certainly better in terms of his movement and control potential. Stamina is a bit better. So certainly like Frikowiak more as a pitcher, but we can't ignore the fact that if Garola fully develops, he is an above-average major league hitter with a lot of position versatility, in addition to being a good, solid major league starting pitcher. So I get the arguments for both of these guys. I get while the majority of viewers who have opined think that Garola is the right choice. But I'm going to go with Frikowiak, and I'll explain why. It's pretty simple, actually. Garola, if he fully develops, is a good hitter, and Garola, if he fully develops, is a good pitcher. Frikowiak, if he fully develops, is a top-line starting pitcher. And I talked about in this past episode that was kind of a weird quirk in the draft this year. Of the 34 picks before us, 28 of them were position players, and there were only 6 pitchers picked. And we've been focusing on pitchers in the draft for the last several years, and we've put together a pretty good pipeline of guys who can be 3, 4, and 5 starters, picking late just about every year. But we haven't had an opportunity to draft a guy who could be a number 1 starter. And we're just very, very rarely going to get that opportunity picking where we're picking in the early to mid to late 30s every season. So the prospect of adding a guy who could really be a top of the rotation starter is more compelling to me than Garola is. Garola, with his pitching profile, is the type of guy that we've been picking regularly over the last several years. And when you look at our team in terms of some of the players that we have developed or are just starting to develop at the major league level or have coming up through our farm system, we've got a lot of those guys who are kind of 3, 4, and 5 starters. We don't really have many, if any, guys who can be a 1 or a 2 starter. And I think it's a unique circumstance this year where we've got the ability to pick up a player like that. I agree that the two-way player like Garola is certainly a bit of a unicorn. We've seen that with Juan Estrada over the past several seasons for our team. He's a guy who can give us 3 WAR plus as a pitcher, and some years he can give us 3 WAR plus as a position player. And I think when I look at Garola's profile, he's a guy who certainly in his better seasons could do that. He's certainly combined pitching and hitting a 5+ WAR player in a typical season for him if he fully develops. And I get the roster efficiency aspect of having a guy who can be an above average pitcher and an above average hitter. But I think the opportunity, and admittedly it's with a high school pitcher, and a high school pitcher is always going to be a roll of the dice, but the opportunity to pick up a guy who could be a frontline starting pitcher is just something we haven't had the opportunity to do in the draft in probably over a decade at this point with where we've been picking. And I find that someone who can be a 1 or 2 starter to me is just a more unique thing to find even than a unicorn. I can duplicate Garola's pitching potential with a lot of guys in our system, and I can duplicate Garola's bat with multiple guys coming up through our farm system right now, as well as guys that I could pick up on the free agent market or through the trade market. I think it's a little more difficult to pick up a frontline starting pitcher through trade. It's going to be real expensive to do, as we found out when we brought on Alexis Barajas. And I do get the point that Garola needs some bonus points for being that above average hitter and above average pitcher wrapped up in one guy. Totally get that point. I also totally get the point that if Frikowiak flames out, he's useless. If Garola flames out as a pitcher, he still could be a good hitter. And if Garola flames out as a hitter, he still could be a good pitcher. And it's fair to also bring up the point that Garola does have that high work ethic that I typically am very attracted to. But we are going to go with Frikowiak. DLL 1B14 also brought up the point that there is some admittedly small probability that with Garola looking for well over slot right now, that he might fall to us in the second round. DLL was not indicating that this is likely, and I agree it's not likely. But I see no probability that a 4.5-star starting pitcher prospect like Frikowiak is going to last to late second round when he's looking for slot. I feel pretty fortunate that there's a guy like that available right now. I think it's probably less than a 10% chance that Garola will fall through to us, but I really think that it's legitimately a 0% chance that Frikowiak will fall through to us. So even if it's only a 1 or 2% chance that Garola falls through, there is some small opportunity for us to come out of this draft with both of these guys. And I've talked, there's also a few other starting pitchers that are not as highly regarded that I really like that I'm hoping might fall to us in the second round as well. So we could have some options there. But we're going to go with Frikowiak. I know that's kind of against the thoughts of most of the group, but I've kind of talked through my rationale for it. And we'll certainly be putting Garola on the list of players whose careers that we follow. So we'll be checking in on how he's doing on an annual basis. So there's a chance that for the next 20, 25 years or so, some of you might be able to say, I told you so, on the Garola versus Frikowiak decision. But we are going with Frack, drafting him, and we'll sim right ahead and see if maybe we get a miracle here in the second round. And we did get a miracle here in the second round. So DLL 1B14, appreciate those thoughts on that was an angle to consider. I did not think it was going to happen. Oh, actually, it looks like, is this a compensatory pick? Current pick is 43 overall, so I probably should have, shows you how closely I've been looking at things. No, it's not a compensatory pick. It's the 43rd pick of the second round. It's not the 43rd pick overall. So I don't even think I'm going to look at anything else. 4.8 million is a lot, but fortunately we are in a financial position right now where we've got some surplus money, and the fact that we can add both of these players that we felt were the two guys that we were most interested in about 40 some odd picks ago at this point, and we can come out of this draft with both of them is a huge potential win for us. And now obviously we'll be following both Frikowiak and Garola real closely, since they're both going to be on our team. I wonder what our scouting director recommends. He recommends Tim Edge, a third baseman. Pretty meh profile. I mean, a useful major leaguer if he completely develops, like his arm. But he's not that exciting. If we were to get his recommendation on a pitcher, he actually still doesn't recommend Garola. He recommends Vince Perloff. Do like Perloff's durability, stuff, movement, and control could all be above average. But we are not going to overthink this. The fact that we're going to come out of this draft with both Frikowiak and Garola makes me think this could be a draft that could help us keep this. I don't want to call it a dynasty because we've only won 2 World Series championships, but this very consistently strong team in Buffalo that's a perennial playoff contender and a perennial playoff participant at this point. Potentially getting Frikowiak and Garola back-to-back in this draft in the mid-30s and the 80s with their overall slots in the draft is a big win for us to hopefully ensure that we can keep something sustainable going here in Buffalo without having to go through a protracted rebuild. So Garola is the selection. Thanks again to all of you who shared your opinions, and it worked out. We got both of our guys. So as I mentioned, pretty excited with the 2 picks that we've made here. Going to kind of pull an audible on this episode at this point. I know from time to time people have asked us to do a deep dive on the draft. Wasn't really planning doing it this time around. I like to do more than just a draft in one episode. But since you've already heard me rambling so long at this point on the Frikowiak versus Garola debate, which thankfully for us ended up being an unnecessary debate, I think I will go through the next 18 rounds and just kind of let you know if we have interesting decisions to make over the next few rounds, and then at least let you know the types of players that we're picking in the later rounds of the draft. Call it an anatomy of a draft kind of thing. Let you know the types of players that I'm typically trying to bring into our system. Clearly, when we get to the late rounds in the draft, a lot of times it's the lesser of dozens of evils that you're selecting. Players who are very unlikely to ultimately contribute at the major league level, but we'll just turn this into an episode where all we do is the draft. So moving ahead to the third round, and there's still a couple of relievers that we talked about in the previous episode. Jeff Dickey, who we think could be a decent one, as well as Danny Kashuk, who's could be a 6'10", is a 6'10" lefty, kind of an interesting prospect. 6'10", 205. He's kind of got that Victor Wembanyama body going, although not quite as tall. Don't love the work ethic and intelligence. Still don't know if I would go for a reliever. I imagine our scout is going to recommend Perloff here to us since he liked him last round. Recommends the catcher Jaquan Redcross. Pretty similar bat to a lot of the guys that our scout has recommended in previous rounds, although I guess that's only two guys. He is durable, a little below average defensively, but for a third round prospect, not a horrible guy to think about. But pitching wise, of course, he still does recommend Perloff to us. And for a third rounder, I don't hate Perloff. Kind of going heavy in the pitchers this year, but this is a guy who ultimately could be a decent starting pitcher. No guarantees that he's going to fully develop, like that he's durable. Stamina is fine. Hold runners is actually a bit better than either Frack or Garola. Doesn't throw quite as hard as those guys, but still a guy who could have plus stuff, movement, and control when all is said and done. I'm going to spend a little time just investigating who's actually left on the market before making a decision, but to get three guys who we think could potentially be major league starters if they fully developed in the first three rounds, not a bad way to begin a draft, because even with high school pitchers, I would hope that we'd hit on at least one of them. And given the great coaching staff that we've built through the minors and the amount of money that we've regularly invested in player development and intend to continue investing in player development, would hope that maybe if we do go with Perloff, 2 out of the 3 could ultimately work out for us. And I do think that Perloff is the way to go. So we are going to go pitcher, pitcher, pitcher in the first 3 rounds of this draft. Clearly, in the case of Garola, we've got a guy who could have some value as a hitter down the line as well, but could be a very important draft for us when we think about what this team could look like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in the future. So we'll go ahead and meet his demand, which is a bit above slot as well. And pretty happy with the first 3 rounds of this draft. Dickey and Kashuk still both out there. Mike Roberts, a college reliever, guy who's not too far off being major league quality, is out there out of Coastal Carolina. Obviously, the competition level for him as a college player is good. Scouting director recommending a center fielder now, Jeremy McGailey, or Makalili, perhaps. Decent hitting profile. Like the fact that he's got some speed, decent outfield range, some positive personality traits. He's durable. For a 4th round pick, I'd like someone a little better, but I could see him being someone that we end up with as well. And we've been looking at guys kind of number of different searches here for the fourth round. Ended up kind of honing in on power potential among hitters. And center fielder Chris Odom has a pretty balanced profile compared to most of the guys who are available at this point. The reason he's still around is that he's impossible in terms of his signability. So I think I'll probably wait another round or two before taking a flyer on him. But certainly one of the more interesting profiles that's out there. I'm actually going to go with a guy who's extremely hard to sign here, Eric Moon, another guy whose bat looks like it could be interesting. I think we actually talked about him in the previous episode as well. Didn't love the lack of speed, didn't love the lack of defense, didn't love the low leadership and adaptability. And he's also a guy who's looking for money that is probably going to be hard for us to meet. So I guess there's still an argument to wait on both of these guys, since we're only likely to be able to sign one of them, and even signing one of them might be a stretch. Jim Tackett, another guy who's impossible to sign. Certainly interesting. So I'm going back and forth here with the number of these guys who are looking for really big money that are still out there. I think maybe I should try to be a little more efficient here in the fourth round, get someone who we know we're going to be able to sign for relatively cheap, and then whoever's left in the fifth or sixth round, maybe take a flyer on somebody there. And given that money is getting a little bit tight with the fact that Garola fell to us in the second round, and we are a team that is trying to compete this year, you can see with the offers we've made at this point to the three draftees, we're getting to the point where we don't have a ton of budget room left. And because of that, I'm going to actually pivot back to the guy that our scout recommended in the third round, and that's the catcher Jaquan Redcross. I don't love the below-average defense, but that bat for a catcher, if it fully develops, is pretty interesting. And think that, especially given his durability, he's not a bad guy to consider here in the fourth round. So we're going to go ahead and draft Mr. Redcross. Move on to the fifth round, and you can see the impossible to sign Odom is still out there. Impossible to sign Josh Burke, who we haven't talked about, is out there. Looks like some of the other guys that we were interested in are gone at this point. Taking a look at the pitchers, a couple guys that we've been looking at for an extended period of time now in the college reliever Mike Roberts, as well as reliever Jeff Dickey, are still out there. And I think here in the fifth round, we're going to go with Jeff Dickey. He, in terms of his upside potential, is as high as anybody out there. Now, admittedly, that's as a reliever. And theoretically, some of these starters, for instance, Dante Addo, who we think is a 2.5-star starting prospect, if we were to view him as a reliever, probably would be a slightly better upside prospect than we think he is as a starter. But Dickey's not looking for crazy money, although for a fifth rounder, it's definitely up there. But he's a guy whose fastball and his splitter aren't far off major league quality now. His fastball could be really good. His splitter could be well above average. And that could add up to a pretty useful right-handed reliever who's also got a little bit of stamina. For a fifth rounder, I don't think it's a bad pick, so we'll go with him. Moving on, we'll see if any of the real expensive guys are left. And it looks like they are not, which is probably fine, because when I look at these first 5 draftees, we have the demands of the 4th and 5th rounders, Red Cross and Dickey, which we're just going to go ahead and meet, are both a bit above slot for them as well. And that puts us in a situation where we're getting real low on our budget room. And as I talked about, we are going to want to ensure that we have some capacity to potentially bring on interesting players through trade, since we are playing for it all this year. So want to maintain a little bit of payroll flexibility if at all possible. I could always, in the middle of the season, if I wanted to, cut scouting or player development back, given that we're already down from where we were a year ago. That's not an optimal solution, but we'll see what the future brings. And in the 5th round, we're going to go with the reliever Mike George. Just think that he has a bit more upside if his fastball and his sinker completely develop compared to Mike Roberts, the college player. We also do kind of like Jadon Lucky. Think that he's a real interesting guy, because if that changeup does develop, he's got 45 stamina. He really could end up being a starting pitcher, and he's durable in terms of his injury proneness. So he's real intriguing to us. The issue is he's looking for $1.1 million, and that would really limit anything that we could possibly do as we get closer to the trade deadline. And given that we're trying to strike the fine line this year between adding a ton of talent in the draft, but also remaining competitive and trying to win it all, I want to kind of preserve that money as much as possible. So we're going to go with Mike George here in the 6th round, even though Jadon Lucky is a very interesting prospect to me. And here in the 7th round, our scout recommends Art Stone, who actually I like as a third base prospect for the 7th round. I think he's pretty interesting bat for a 7th rounder. Doesn't have a lot of speed. Not great defensively, but he is versatile at least. And although he's got low leadership, has a couple of positive personality traits. But he's another guy who's looking for more than slot. And at this point, I want to preserve that money because we want to have a great draft, but we also want to try to win it all this year. So we are going to pivot back to another reliever, Mike Roberts. He's a guy who could be a helpful pitcher for our bullpen in the majors in the not so distant future. For a 7th round pick, thinks that Roberts is an interesting guy to go with, so we'll pick Roberts here. Moving on to the 8th, scouting director recommends Alberto Pirelli. Not an uninteresting prospect for an 8th rounder. Top end potential is a borderline starter. But he is a left-handed arm, not looking for crazy money. We're going to investigate more players before making a decision, but I don't hate Pirelli. And Pirelli's going to be the selection for us here in the 8th round. As I said, best case scenario is kind of a 5th starter, and even that is marginal, but there's always a chance for some talent change randomness to work in our favor. So we'll go ahead and pick up Mr. Pirelli in the 8th round. 9th round, our scout is recommending Zaire Boxhill, a left-handed starting pitching prospect. Another guy who for the 9th round in terms of his potential talent set is interesting. Now he's reliant on a changeup developing to actually be a starter, and he's got some pretty negative personality traits. So probably not the guy that we're going to go with. We've been looking at Joe Jones the last couple rounds in the draft. He's the last 3-star potential guy out there. He's really just a pure home run hitter, but he does bring some positive personality traits. I think it's doubtful that he's ever going to develop enough to be a useful major league hitter. He's basically just a one-dimensional slugger. But the hope with our strong coaching and our big investment in player development, maybe we get a little lucky and his contact and his eye end up a little better than we think that they could be, and mix that in with some excellent work ethic, and maybe he becomes a useful bat who can hit the ball out of the park for us from time to time. For a 9th rounder, I think he's a guy worth taking a gamble on. Moving on to the 10th, Jost Gulp is the recommendation. Hope we can do better than that. Like his defense as a catcher, just don't think the bat is ever going to be major league quality. In Gulp, to be fair, using the rationale I used for our 9th round pick, we like his catcher ability. We do invest heavily in player development. If we get a little more out of his bat than we think we could, he becomes a potentially useful backup catcher to us. So I'm intrigued by Gulp. If he's around in the 11th round, I think we'd probably take him. But we're going to go with Mike Jeffers here, a reliever who has potentially really interesting stuff. Could be a 3-pitch guy if that changeup develops. Doesn't really have the stamina to be a consistent 5+ inning starter. But he's durable. He's got a high work ethic. Question whether he's going to have enough movement on his pitches and enough control with his pitching to be a major leaguer. But he's got some talent. He throws in the mid-90s. He's potentially got 2 to 3 well above average pitchers, and he's durable. So we're going to go with Jeffers here in the 10th round. Moving on to the 11th. Scout is now recommending Alan Powell, a catcher who is much less interesting to us. Presumably that means that Jost Gulp is gone, but that is not the case. He's just switched his recommendation. So we're going to go ahead and pick Mr. Gulp here in the 11th round. Moving on to the 12th, scouting director recommends Chris Kretschmar, starting pitching prospect. Yeesh, gonna give up a lot of dingers being a fly ball pitcher with well below average movement, but beggars can't be choosers here in the 12th round either. And here, as we approach the teen rounds in the draft, the level of talent is not that impressive. We're going to go with the reliever Juan Castro. He's got a major league fastball and slider right now. He's durable. He's coming out of Alabama, Huntsville. He's a left-handed pitcher. Question whether he's ever going to know where the ball is going as he tries to get it over the plate, but does have 2 major league pitches at this point, so at least he's got some of the tools necessary for success. I think he's kind of more just minor league depth, but worth a gamble in my perspective here in the 12th. 13th, Alan Powell, catcher, recommended still by our scout. I think I'll probably end up going in a different direction here as well. And the pickings are getting slim here. 13th round, we're going to go with center fielder Chris Rogers. I think his contact and his home run power could be a little bit above average if everything develops. Left-handed hitter. Maybe he is a useful pinch hitter off the bench in a best-case scenario. So we will go with him in 13. Moving on to 14, scouting director recommending Edgar Trejo. Got a little speed, not much of a bat. Kind of meh defensively. Meh personality to negative personality, perhaps. hope we can find someone a little more interesting than that. And here in the 14th round, we're just going with a guy with potential. We looked at all the guys with 55 power potential, which is the most that we've got. And Jonathan Euphema, center fielder, kind of is the most toolsy of anybody. Good outfield range, pretty good speed, does have a high work ethic. He's durable. He's going to strike out a ton. Don't know if he's ever going to make enough contact to be a major leaguer. But looking at the rest of the opportunity set out there, think that he is the direction that we are going to go here in the 14th round. 15th round, scouting director recommends Jaheim Bethea. Do like his personality. Other than that, question very strongly whether he's ever actually going to be a major leaguer, but we're kind of getting to the point where we typically just end up bringing on players who have some interesting personalities to hopefully be a positive influence on the real prospects who are in our system. And there's no real interesting combinations of stuff, movement, and control available at this point among the pitchers. We could end up going with Bethea, but I'm going to do a little more work on the position players before we make that decision for sure. And we are going to go with Bethea here in the 15th round. Don't think he's a big-time prospect, but we like his personality. The 16th round, I got a guy I'm targeting, but we'll see what the scouting director recommends. He recommends Lazaro Guerra. Meh. I'm going to go with personality. Billy Barrier, 19-year-old, high leadership, loyalty, work ethic, low greed, not the best adaptability. Don't think he's a big-time prospect, more just a nice personality mix to pick up and put into our farm system. Moving on to the 17th round, and our scouting director recommending John Peterson, a very uninspiring starting pitching prospect, but still is a arm to hope with. Gil Burns, a 21-year-old third baseman out of Flagler College, does have high leadership and work ethic, but he's really a non-prospect in terms of his skills. I don't really think Peterson is a great prospect, but for the 17th round, it's a guy who, in a perfect world, could be a useful starter. Moving on to the 18th round, scouting director recommends Doug the Rebel Hopper, shortstop. Does have some positive personality traits, but the bat just does not look like it's ever going to be there. I've been kind of targeting the reliever John Lee, guy who also never really going to be a major league contender. Has faced poor competition at his junior college level, but he's durable and has a lot of positive personality traits. Hopefully he's a guy who can help in our low minors over the next few years, so we'll pick him in the 18th round. 19th round, scouting recommends Jaheim Franshaw, a high school reliever, another guy who's really a non-prospect at this point in the draft. Kind of just looking for positive personalities. Juan Arambulo, high leadership, work ethic, low financial ambition. I mean, he is a total non-prospect, though. His competition level has been great at Arizona, but if we can't find someone who's a little more of a prospect with some positive personality traits, we could go there. Our old buddy Gil Burns is still around. Phil Boyd, shortstop. I think he's got more of a strong positive personality tilt with 4 positive, only 1 negative personality thing. Also a guy who can at least be a competent fielder in the minors. He doesn't know how to hit. This is probably what my hitting profile would have looked like if I was a prospect, although my avoid Ks would not have been nearly as good as Mr. Boyd's. But he's got a pretty positive personality. He's just organizational depth will bring him on in round 19. Last but not least, we get to Mr. Irrelevant of this baseball draft. Scouting director recommends Greg Carr, a catcher. He has the devil personality. He is negative in all 6 personality traits. He is a nice defensive catcher, but with a devil personality and having faced poor competition, we are not going to bring Mr. Carr into our organization. And here in the 20th round, we're going to actually bring in another catcher, Joel McQuaid, 21-year-old out of Oklahoma State. Decent defensively, nice arm, high leadership, loyalty, and work ethic. Just a guy who can hopefully be a positive influence on some of the real prospects in our minor league system for 2 or 3 years before McQuaid goes and becomes an accountant or a teacher or a plumber or whatever he's going to do with his life, because I don't think he's going to be a Major League Baseball player when all is said and done. And with that, the 2039 draft is over. Real excited to have picked up Frikowiak and Garola in the first 2 rounds. I think Vince Perloff as a starting pitching prospect in the 3rd is interesting. Jaquan Redcross, I typically won't go for a catcher who's below average, but I do like the durability, and the bat is potentially interesting. Maybe we'll be able to get a little more out of him defensively than we think his potential is at this point. And then Jeff Dickey is for a 5th round pick, a guy who looks like he could be a useful reliever down the line. So pretty pleased with the draft. Thanks again to all who shared their opinions on where we should go. Think it worked out really well with the 2 guys that we liked and the 2 guys that everyone who opined liked being the 2 guys we ended up in. Hopefully this could be a foundational draft for us over the next 10 to 15 years in terms of what we accomplish in Buffalo. Turning our attention back to 2039, in our next episode, we'll sim up through the All-Star break, see what this team looks like at the midway point of the season, and start putting a plan together for what, if anything, we should do with the limited amount of money we have left as the trade deadline approaches. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.